Hi, and welcome to Pour Over Think, a podcast where we have a pour over drinks while we pour over things and purely overthink. I'm Mischief.
And I'm Sherigan.
Today, we have a book club. I seem to have accidentally initiated another discussion topic, because not too long ago I wrote a quick piece about my experiences with reading and reading as a hobby, and it left some impact. To summarize the article, it covers my personal reading journey, or the lack of it, that I had all through 2023. It started with me reflecting on the books that I've read and thinking that I've just not been as engaged in a hobby as I've been in the past. I then tried to motivate myself into getting back into the rhythm of reading, and that didn't go so well. Specifically, the article talks about my experience with the website Goodreads and how it changed my journey. But I also have to say, I hadn't really known about the site beforehand, and I think that was part of the issue. But for those like me, the website Goodreads defines itself as the world's largest site for readers and book recommendations, with the goal to help discover books they love and get more out of reading. And one thing that this website offered was the Goodreads Reading Challenge. It's presented as a personal challenge. You can pledge whichever many books you want to read within a year's time, and it'll keep track of your progress. And I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was going to be motivating and not at all pressuring, and I was wrong.
When I read this definition of Goodreads and you started telling me about this challenge, I was like, wait, isn't a reading challenge where you pledge an amount of books at odds with this goal to help you discover books you love and get more out of reading? Because if you're trying to hit a goal of X books read in a year, that encourages you to read more books quicker, not get more out of reading, which in my book would be taking your time to really engage with the book on a deeper level and to really get something out of it. And while I read your article, I also felt like this was the central struggle you kind of highlighted. I know how you personally like to take your time to engage with books and really think about them rather than simply consuming them. But a challenge focused on the amount of books you read in a given time frame just seems antithetical to that. And like you said yourself in the article, truly, this challenge isn't just for you, it's a competition to show random strangers that you are an avid reader. So, yeah, how do you feel about that?
It's complicated, because I do agree, this argument is very much there, but I think the goal of the reading challenge initially is not to have you read as much as possible, but to motivate you to read. So basically, if you're used to reading one book a year and you pledge 3, it's a challenge to yourself to move out of your niche, try more. And for me, it looked very engaging and interesting because I felt like I wasn't reading as much as I should be, because I like reading a lot, but I kind of fell off the hobby because I was busy and doing so many other things. So to me, it felt like the idea of pledging a certain amount of books would be useful. In the article, I said my initial goal should have been 12, as in read a book a month, because I felt like I should be reading more. I didn't do that back then. But I do feel like this idea of challenging yourself to kind of engage more with a hobby, especially if you enjoy the hobby, but the problem still exists, because what if you then pledge 500 books? Are you still actually enjoying the book, or are you just going through them to have X amount? So I certainly do see the issue there. But initially, when I looked at that, I saw it as a more additional outside motivation. I mean, I just said I like reading, and I guess I just have to ask you that too. I mean, do you like reading, and what exactly does that mean for you?
Well, I do like reading. But I sort of had to rediscover that for myself, because I like reading, I realized, when it's a choice I make rather than something required of me. When I started my studies in English literature, I was still someone who read quite a bit for pleasure. But the mountain of required reading in academia made it so that all my time and the reading stamina essentially went into reading what I had to read. And while I enjoyed reading narratives for seminars, like, plays and novels and stuff, it's a very different mode of reading when you need to pay close attention for an analysis than if you were reading the same text purely for pleasure, and a much more exhausting mode of reading at that. At the end of the day, I wanted to do something that didn't require more reading, and so I'd gravitate more towards video games or YouTube content instead, and I started to sort of associate reading with work, and in your time off, more work is the one thing you don't want to do, so I didn't read for pleasure anymore. It took me a whole while to realize that I could still be hooked by a piece of fiction despite that, and I'm glad I've recently regained the ability. This was, for a bunch of reasons, and partially just because I decided to try again and read something for fun, and also immersing myself in these worlds that the books offered, really just, letting go of that analytical sort of brain and just reading a story for its own sake in that sense. And I also diversified into listening to audiobooks and reading manga for the first time in, ever.
I would like to elaborate a bit first on the associating reading with work bit, because I do agree that it is quite rough to have to read so much for classes, no matter if it's a narrative, poems, or just a lot of papers. And for me, that I still enjoyed it, but I wouldn't engage with it outside of class either. So I usually went to like fan fictions or simpler narratives, or as well YouTube, to kind of still get some entertainment. But I never thought it was annoying work to do for a class. I still enjoyed it, but I just wouldn't do anything outside of it because I already spent so much time reading.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a similar vein, but I didn't really look at it as negatively, I would say. And that's kind of what I think is interesting.
It's also so easy to just sort of do something else instead. Just go on YouTube, watch a video instead. We live in such a crazy time where there's much more content anywhere than you could possibly ever consume. And it's just, the ease with which you can access that content just makes it a bit, not necessarily more appealing, but it's easier for you to just go on YouTube, click on a thumbnail that baits you successfully, and then just lose hours to the rabbit hole. And with books, you'd have to make more of an effort to get one off your shelf, start reading, and keep reading. And I think that was also a factor for me in that regard.
I actually have the funniest story about books that I had to read for class, and we were in the same class, so you will remember that maybe. But we had to read Hamlet. Do you remember that?
I remember that we had to read it, but I don't know where the story's going.
The story started about 3 years beforehand, when I still studied a different subject that wasn't literature, and I was like, oh, now I'm a college student. I have finally the time to read Shakespeare's Hamlet, because I always wanted to read it, but I never had the time. Basically, cultural osmosis made it so that I was very aware of the story, and I never actually read the play, but I really wanted to read it. So I bought the book as soon as I started college, even though it was not mandatory reading in any way. 3 years later, I still haven't read it, and then we had to read it for class. And I think I even mentioned to you, I get to read Hamlet. And then I didn't read it for class. I took all the notes, and I even wrote a whole exam paper on the soliloquy and stuff. I've never read Hamlet. And just recently I saw the book again on my shelf, and I saw that I had a bookmark in it. I was like, oh, did I actually read? I made it 3 pages in.
Do you remember, why you didn't read it at the time?
I probably didn't have the time because I also studied film, and we usually had to watch like 3 movies per week and read like the poems and books, and I was probably just exhausted. And because I was like, oh, I like reading Hamlet and I know so much about it, I have time whenever, and that was the one book I then ended up not reading because I actually knew a lot about it already. But it's still so funny to me. Oops.
Yeah, you can say that again. That is a good story.
I do like that I actually got a good grade for my Hamlet paper, considering I did not read the book.
Take notes. Well, you know.
It's even worse, by the way, because the only reason I knew the story so well as a child was because The Simpsons did it, and I was like, that looks interesting.
That was your main source of Hamlet knowledge?
Back when I was 8, yes.
I mean, that makes sense when you were 8, you know, still.
That's just what it reminded me of now, where I'm like, we had to read so much for class. You barely had the time, even if you were interested.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point you're just exhausted, and the content that you then look out for is usually either something very palatable, like something easy to digest, or just a random rabbit hole that will keep you entertained for 3 hours, but not the actual thing you were supposed to read.
Facts.
Facts of school. I mean, same thing with film, by the way. There are so many movies I haven't seen that I was supposed to watch.
Yeah, I can believe that.
But I'm kind of moving off track already. You mentioned before you diversified to get back into reading, right? Through manga and audiobooks. And it kind of reminds me also this arbitrary argument, what exactly counts as reading. Because reading a book, that makes sense, you know what you're doing. You have a certain value if you read a book. If you read a comic or a manga, it's not the same, or is it? And then you have reading newspaper articles or an academic paper. If you read a collection of short stories, does it have to be in a book? Again, fan fiction is all online, and does that count? It's quite complicated, and why does it matter if you say, I've read a book today? I would never tell someone, oh, I've read so much fan fiction today. Spent all my day reading fan fiction, and people could tell me, oh, well, you could have read The Odyssey instead. I feel like there is an issue of like devalue a format for arbitrary reasons, I guess. Or, well, rather subjective reasons. But how do you feel about that?
I think part of it stems sort of from the idea that we only count reading we do for pleasure. So like, if you're reading because you somehow have to, be it for work, for school or anything like that, that doesn't count, because a reader is someone who reads in their spare time, and also because they want to, because it's their hobby. And when you read a newspaper or academic papers or books, these are things you read to be informed or to acquire knowledge, not reading for the sake of reading or pleasure. And therefore, I think many people wouldn't count that sort of reading towards, being a reader. And you also can't really recommend academic literature to the average person like you'd recommend a decent thriller or anything like that you've read. But
now I wonder, sorry for interjecting, for example, like the fanfiction stuff, right? That is also for pleasure, but people already devalue it because it's not a book.
Mm-hmm.
How would you frame that then for your argument? Because, I mean, you still do it for pleasure, but it doesn't count as much as a book because it's not a book, because we don't know who's written it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a different kind of devaluation. Because, I mean, there are horrible books out there, and there are horrible fanfictions out there, and there are great books out there and great fanfictions. It doesn't really matter if it's a book or not. And I feel like devaluing it as such is kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to go back to Shakespeare, Tolkien was inspired by Macbeth and disappointed, and there's a reason the trees walk in Middle-earth.
Mm-hmm.
So would that count as fanfiction or inspiration? And you have like a lot of works that are inspired by other pieces of media and then devaluing it because it's not a book. It's kind of sad.
It is a bit weird. I think that has to do with how people see books as something written by authors rather than something written by people like them, right? Like an author is someone who does this professionally and who was in the old days published through through a traditional publisher that made a book out of their story. And the understanding was that if you are published, someone had to review that book and basically say, hey, yeah, this manuscript, this is good. You can be an author now. We can market this, we can put this on shelves. You get to be an author, which is kind of an institutional view of looking at it, right? You are a writer, you are an author, rather, if you have books on the shelves, if your books are sold. And I think that's the way a lot of people think about it, but that doesn't have to be indicative of the quality of writing, like you say.
Also today with self-publishing and stuff, what people publish as books, if I'm now going towards the Amazon like Kindle lines for like online books, ebooks, you can have 5,000 words. It's a short story and this is sold. I'm not saying quality good or bad here, I'm just talking about how easy it can be to actually sell these things. So then you'd already be a published author and there is no quality control anywhere. I mean, that's one thing. The other one is a lot of fanfiction readers that still publish books, they publish similar writing because they're still the same people, you know, it's just now they publish. It doesn't really change the quality of writing. So if they were not the greatest writers beforehand, they probably will not be, even if they publish. And the other way around, if they're actively like really talented writers, having a book deal will just help them further because they have the writing abilities.
I feel like a lot of the time, you know, people will look at fan fiction and go like, oh my god, this is so good, you know, why don't you try publishing it? And then of course the answer is, well, I can't because it's based on the legal property of someone else. And people were like, well, but you write so well, couldn't you write like original fiction and publish that and make a living out of it? And that view is kind of the view that, oh, writing fan fiction is like this pipeline, this springboard that gets you to being an actual published author, which doesn't need to be the case. And yeah, I feel like that's how people frame it sometimes. And I'll say I haven't read a lot of fan fiction myself, and it is one of these things where I have a hard time bothering with fan fiction. Say it like that. Like if somebody recommends me a piece of fan fiction, I might read it. But generally I will not seek out fan fiction because most of the time I am not a fan of people taking someone's ideas, someone's characters specifically, and I know this is a gripe with a specific kind of fan fiction that I have. But like the kinds of fan fiction where people just take a plot line, take characters from an established property, and they go and do like rewrites, and especially when they're done for like romance reasons, it's always so off-putting to me when it's done poorly, because you just take somebody else's characters that they've established and you're bending them in ways, if done poorly, where the characters wouldn't actually behave that way if they were still true to their original selves. And, you know, to me, it's fine as a writing exercise, but to me it's also sort of disrespectful of the original material if done poorly. Again, you can do this properly and, you know, really study the characters and try and emulate as much as you can how you think these characters would act. But if you fundamentally change how they act or what they do given a certain situation, then from a certain point of view, those aren't even the same characters anymore. They're just your characters wearing that skin, and at that point it's just sort of wish fulfillment of what you wish had happened, and I personally really don't care for that.
I mean, fair play. I do think it depends a lot, because I mean, I've mentioned it before, I read fanfiction. I really like it when people not take their own spin, but elaborate further. For example, if you have a movie, the movie's only 90 minutes or something, and you have like implications, but we never really see them play out, or like internal thoughts and stuff. I'm really interested in people elaborating on those, and there you see where people come from sometimes. I mean, now I'm elaborating quite a bit, but if someone that studies psychology looks at these characters and recognizes certain bits and then elaborates and writes a piece of fiction, fan fiction, that covers that aspect of it and elaborates on it, it's not a paper, it's not academia, but it's an attempt at analyzing a character through this bit of story, and I think that can be very interesting. I do also admit, though, I have read some stuff that was just basically crack taken seriously, where the premise is like so out of whack, and it's just meant to, okay, this is the weirdest shitty premise, but what would they do if now aliens appeared? But they wrote it as strict to character as possible, so you have the weirdest things happening, but the characters are still in character. And if done well, this stuff can be fun. But I would say that is entertainment, but the problem I see in these kind of things, if you indulge too much, the fanon, like what the fandom thinks is right or correct, kind of tries to overwrite canon. And this is when flanderizations and stuff happens, you know, when certain aspects that were maybe a one-off joke in a series or in a book become major characteristics, and it's just not fine anymore. And there I see the issue too, because then it's not really in character. But also, sometimes you just have so much potential in a thing, and trying to take a gander at it and seeing where that could go if someone that, now we go back to psychology, like understands this a bit more than just 5 minutes and then everything's ignored. I feel like writing this is fine, but not making money from it, because again, it's not your property and stuff, and it's all fandom. And the argument with the Code of Paint, I also kind of agree. That's how we get 50 Shades of Grey, by the way.
Yeah.
You have a Twilight fanfiction that is now in an alternative universe that has like similar characteristics but isn't the same people, and then people say, oh, wouldn't that be great to have this as its own story, just change the names, they're different enough. But they're basically paper cutouts to a degree that then get intimate, I guess. So I completely see like both sides of fanfiction, the good and bad, a bit more, but I also just enjoy fandom. But I have my grievances with things, but also sometimes I'm a bit more open, because if we go for shows or movies, for example, and now I bring up the MCU, there are so many directors playing pretend with these characters, and the characters themselves are based on comics from like more than 50 years of different storylines. I feel like fanfiction isn't much different. You have a writer taking characters they like, trying to do something with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then it's more like an adaptation piece. I do understand your argument, and I do agree, and this is where I go, well, don't take the likeness and so much of it and then sell them as your own. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like and now I get to tell a story or write a story with these characters and then publish it online is not that harmful usually.
Since you mentioned comics, the big thing there for me is like the, comic writers having the license to do that, and like comics just sort of working that way. And we're like, let's be real. Well, no, I might be leaning out a bit too far here, but from what I've seen, comics usually, especially like superhero comics, the characters are more like archetypes of some sort that kind of symbolize something, that stand for something, that are supposed to highlight particular traits, particular issues, and so on and so forth. And with like how often retcons happen or alternative universes and that, they're more like stock characters that you can, shape to some sort of degree if you keep their core intact, or you radically alter the core, like you turn Superman evil, and see what happens, because that's just kinda how comics work in that respect. And I feel like that's somewhat different, that's somewhat fine. And when it comes to fan fiction, the type I do enjoy is the type where someone doesn't really just take characters, but almost takes like entire universes and goes like, all right, I'm gonna keep the rules of this world as laid out in the original work, but I'm going to invent my own characters and my own storyline based in that world to further explore some of the same implications, like some of the implications that were present in the original work, but didn't really get any page time, if you will, in the original work. And I'll try and elaborate on that, which is sort of what you mentioned earlier, where you fill in the blanks. I am much more okay with that, but as always, under the condition that it is done, respectfully, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So
the thing with the comics, with your argument there, I do understand the reboot argument, or like, the universe has been reshaped many, many times. But the way I see it, sometimes what you have as a problem is you have a guest artist, you have a guest writer, and it's the same run. And the person working in this run does not read the comics in its run and just fucks it up.
Yeah, that's a problem.
And that is a problem that exists. And it happens for TV series where writers are unaware of the characters they're supposed to write. And then I go, well, if fanfiction says I can fix this, I sometimes believe them because they know the characters, they have actually been paying attention and watched the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair. I totally see that.
I give certain fandoms, certain bits more leeway where I'm like, I understand where the fandom is coming from when they argue. We get it. However, this is a very dangerous slippery slope because no, the fandom doesn't always get it. The fandom has its own big issues and the fandom is not one collective that actually understands what's going on. There are a lot of weird things. I say I'm never online, but chronically online on Tumblr is really bad. Yeah, literature analysis is not a thing they do. Or if they do it, only half of them does it. It can get quite frustrating, but I was a bit of a tangent there. I do feel like devaluing it because it's fanfiction is stupid.
Mm-hmm.
In a weird way, it's like, I don't agree with this assessment because there's a lot that you can find there, not just as potential writing exercises and stuff, because it can explore stuff that you can't do in the original work, because the original work has a very tight schedule. You can't really do slice of life, you can't really evaluate this. However, I do agree, not everything's great, but I do think it's a fun way to engage with the thing itself, as long as it's not turning into, I say, a Bible, basically, it's not the, for liking the series, you need to know the fandom lore. Then you're lost, that's frustrating as hell. You should be able to just have fun with how much you want to engage with it. But devaluing it just because it's fanfiction is kind of weird to me. You can devalue it if it's bad fanfiction, that's something completely different. It's like devaluing something because it's a bad book. But then again, the question is, what is bad? Because, all subjective, what you enjoy and what others enjoy, right?
Absolutely. And as a final thing about this whole fanfiction thing, I don't need to tell you about this, but I'm just going to say intertextuality. And where do you draw the line for fanfiction? When is a work inspired by something and when is it fanfiction of something? In a way, most works are derivative of something else. Usually there's not a single inspiration for whatever a writer is producing. There are usually many inspirations flowing into a new work, but these could still be traced to other things that the author has read, that they've seen, that they've experienced, and so on and so forth. And it can be as much as I like this trope, I like the wise old mentor, I'm gonna put one in the book. That doesn't mean you're writing a Lord of the Rings fanfiction, even if he is wearing a big hat and is smoking weed. Even if your Gandalf inspiration, for instance, would be clear as day.
I really thought you were talking about Star Wars, the wise old mentor. I was like, isn't that Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Well, that's the other direction you could go.
Does he smoke weed, though? The true question.
I think he just gets high on the Force. I don't think he does any drugs, honestly.
Space weed. Speed.
Swede. Oh my god. But yeah, as you kind of can see, the line is somewhere, but where exactly you draw the line you could write entire books about that, and people have. And, I don't really want to get into it, especially if you've never really thought about it. Just kind of jog your brain, like, oh yeah, everything anyone does writes is like inspired by other works that they like, and that's okay. There is no such thing as 100% originality.
Every thought was thought before.
I think.
Potentially, I thought so.
Wonderful.
But I did distract you before.
No, that was good.
I'm throwing structures out of the window. It's my favorite thing to do.
Out the window.
To the floor. No, but to get back...
We were talking about devaluing things for their format. We've spoken at length about fanfiction at this point, and I was going to talk about manga and comics, or more manga in my case, and I think what's happening, or what has been happening, is that these media still carry the sort of stigma of having too many pictures and too little text to be a book, and being for children, especially among older generations that maybe even haven't engaged with them at all. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the surge in manga sales influences that image here in Switzerland. And the Swiss media SRF Impact actually recently reported that manga sales have almost quadrupled in the past 5 years. And I can personally attest to that because my manga purchases have actually exactly quadrupled in the past year. I bought 4 more manga volumes than I ever bought before, which was 0. So yeah.
Quadruple 0 is still 0.
Shit.
That's why you're a literature student and not math.
Exactly. Wonderful.
I'm so sorry.
That's staying in.
No, but the funny thing is I haven't really read much manga, so I can't attest to that. But I grew up with comic books. It was Tintin in French. It's called The Adventures of Tintin. Only in Germany and Switzerland he's called Tim. Okay. But these comics were very, like, Tim's a journalist and trying to, like, solve big conspiracies and stuff. And they had gang fights. There was, like, a whole thing about curses and smuggling rings and stuff. And I read that as a kid and I did not understand most of it. I only remember one of those comic books had like a very realistic spider in it, so I never read that one. I read every other one. I mean, also, Tim's best friend is a alcoholic captain. I don't think that was geared towards children.
It's funny you say that, because like if you were to ask me what the target demographic of the Tintin series is, I would have confidently answered children. And I couldn't really put a finger on it. And this might just be the aforementioned bias at work. Yeah, because like I know my parents would have certainly categorized it that way.
The Blue Lotus included freaking drugs. I feel like Tintin is like one of those comic books that was meant for, I guess, young adults, probably?
Probably.
Asterix or Lucky Luke, I kind of understand where you can get with the for children bit a bit more, if you'd like. I mean, Calvin and Hobbes. I don't think that's geared towards children either. I've read all of these as a kid because, yeah, people gave them to me, but I feel like I understood them better in my teens, basically. And with the superhero stories, I feel like they're more a middle ground because they have silly elements to it, but depending on its run and whenever you get them, the topics that they cover are still rather dark. I'm not saying those are not topics that you can engage with as a kid, but I feel like the understanding of these themes happens if you're a bit older, you know? There are a lot of instances where I'm like, it's implied that the actual reader base would have been older because who else buys comics? Because they need to be bought. Children don't have the money to buy a comic. I don't know. I completely do see why this is a thing, but I feel like thematically, they never really seemed geared to children to me because it was always, oh, those are my dad's comics. My dad probably got them as a teen, but we grew up and my dad still liked them and he was an adult, so it was like my dad's comics. And my comics then turn into superhero comics. It's like, oh no.
I get what you're saying, and I think comics and manga have had and still have the same sort of image problem, almost literally an image problem, where certain adults just think, oh yeah, pictures, less text, therefore closer to a picture book, therefore for a younger audience. I think that's the train of thought that a lot of older people who make these sort of judgment calls sort of have. I mean, there are comics geared towards children, there are manga geared towards children, but there are also comics and mangas geared towards young adults or adults explicitly.
They're not really a genre in itself, because comic books includes everything.
Exactly, they're a medium.
It's like if you say films are geared towards children.
Yeah, I think that's how I'd summarize it. People treat it as if it was a genre, like, oh, it has pictures in it, or like it has a lot of pictures in it, therefore it must be targeted at children and must have content geared towards children, when really it's just a different art form.
I was looking for a nice, like, easy, digestible manga for my imaginary child friend, right? So I got them the new Junji Ito collection.
This is my home. It was made for me.
Since that imaginary child read all of that, it's been getting weird, sometimes a bit twisty, sometimes a bit, slightly off-putting, but nothing a good old TV show can fix. Luckily, I know a good one for children. Let's watch Death Note.
Oh my god. If you want to hear our thoughts about Death Note, we have a prior episode on that.
Oh, true, I didn't even think of that. That's great.
You're welcome.
It is so weird how, again, it's not called a stereotype, stigma, how these stigmatas are just given to these formats without really looking at what's in there. It's just judged for no darn reason.
Quite literally judged by their covers.
True.
Sometimes.
I mean, I did say beforehand, there's a lot of subjectivity going into these judgments, because what you like or what you think is or isn't valuable is very subjective. And one of my questions then would have been, where do we set our lines? Like, what are these arbitrary lines for us?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's funny because you mentioned earlier that you got back into reading because you listened to audiobooks. And this is one of my main pet peeves. I struggle with the connotations of audiobooks that then connect to reading, just because linguistically it doesn't make sense to me. I'm like very pedantic there, but to me it's like reading a book is one thing, listening to an audiobook is something else. The results are the same. I'm not devaluing what you're doing or how you're doing it. I understand where this is coming from, but it's not in the same line to me, because if I read a book, if I focus on a book, that uses different things than if I have to focus on listening to an audiobook. It's a different kind of engagement, because if I have to read, it's a very direct focus on a page. If I'm listening to something, I listen to all the voices and audio, and it's just a completely different experience to me. So I struggle to then say, oh, I read a book, but I meant I listened to the audiobook. Then again, if I listen to Hamlet, you still get the same content, you still get the same amount of time that you invest with it, and you can still make your own thoughts on it. It's very similar, but at the same time my brain goes, but if you listen to it, you haven't read? It's like result same, different word. Why are we saying reading? It's a very arbitrary line. I have the very stupid comparison where it's like, it's not apples and oranges, it's still both apples, but they're different apples, One is sour, one is sweet, they taste different, you don't use them for the same thing.
And now I'm actually going to ruin you by asking, which one do you consider to be the sour apple?
The thing is, I like sour apples a lot, so...
Ha! Nice.
Apples are my favorite fruit. That's why this comparison exists, and they're not oranges. They're apples because I like apples.
I hate apples, I'm allergic to apples.
Oh yeah, true, you said so. That's why you don't read.
Different tastes.
I guess part of it is also because I really like well, it's not really audiobooks, but the audio theater stuff. You know, you have these audio dramas and so on, and they're very complicated. I can go back into the Magnus archives and ruin it by mentioning them, which I do. Like these things, heavy investment of time, you think a lot, you get a lot out of it, but I don't value this as I've read the Magnus archives. I listen to the story, and when I listen to an audiobook, I'm like, you get a lot out of this because you have the voice acting, you have the like all the additional sounds sometimes that they do, because editing, soundscaping for these things can get from barely anything to very intense, which I think is really cool. But the experience to me is different because on what I focus or how I focus on the story is different. The result in the end of knowing the story and having experienced it is still the same though.
I do wonder about that actually. Like that's been top of my mind ever since you started saying that. I wonder if there are studies because, okay, bit of context. I've recently had a full day seminar on radio production, and one of the crucial things hammered home to us in that seminar was that writing for audio was different than writing for the page, right?
Yep.
If you went by that logic and took it to its extreme, you would expect that if you simply take a written book and record an audiobook off of it, you would expect people to have worse retention of the actual events or the details when they listen to the audiobook compared to a group that had read the book. Because one of the assumptions in the whole writing for audio is different bit is, oh, you should use easier language, simpler words, shorter sentences, so it's easier for the audience to follow when they just have it on passively in the background. And we all know works of literature, you know, they can do the exact opposite of that. And so if that was true, absolute, then you would expect people to get less out of an audiobook in terms of how much they remember it, how much they pay attention to it. And I wonder if there are any studies on that, because that would be interesting to see.
I also feel like this again depends, because even if you do these studies, it's sometimes really rough to decide, well, what is like the perfect subject? Because the thing is, I can listen to an audiobook, for example, and not pay attention because I'm multitasking and I lost focus. Like for me, it's harder to listen to an audiobook because I may lose focus. I get distracted easily. I start fidgeting on something. I lost track. When I read, I'm heavily focused on the book and I have the pace as I read. I don't lose track as easily. While I was listening to the Magnus archives, I couldn't do anything else, because if I was doing anything else, I forgot what I was doing. I just lost track of where I was. It's sometimes really rough to actually retain everything, but also I know people, for them it's different. When they read, they lose track because they just can't focus on the words, but listening to something is very simple. So I don't want to devalue and say, oh, just because you can do something else or something, it's not the same. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where I go, how do you decide what the person for your study would be? Like, you can't really know what type of person they are, or if they're used to this, because if you're used to listening to lectures or longer words and stuff, then you're kind of used to audiobooks being more complicated, right? This is also something you learn.
Yeah, sure, but like you'd get a reasonable enough sample size that you could account for that diversity in listeners and readers, of course.
True.
Ideally, if you were actually doing scientific studies on this. But like what you just highlighted, I think it is weird. I agree with you that saying I read an audiobook is kind of weird. But I think the more meaningful, or, well, in a way, the more interesting distinction is like, to be reading in a broader sense, you have to be actively engaging in the act. You have to sit down and you have to consciously make an effort to read. Now, you could say, if, like you with the Magnus archives, right, you realize, oh, if I do things on the side, I lose track of what is being said, I lose track of the story, I have to stop doing whatever else I'm doing, because this is first monitor content, and I have to put the other things aside and actively listen. At that point, you could make the argument that the act of actively listening is equivalent to the act of actively reading. But, before that, it gets murky. When you're doing other stuff and it's kind of just on there in the background, it has a bit of a different quality to it than if you were really just taking the time to only listen.
I mean, same though for reading when you just skim certain passages after a while.
Exactly.
Like that's the thing people do because it's like, oh, it's another description or something.
Mm-hmm.
You still get the gist of it, but you're not, I say, deep focused now. But just because I don't know what else to call it. But also, I noticed one funny thing though. There are differences sometimes because if we take Hitchhiker's Guide Through the Galaxy, right? The radio show was first, the book is the same story but written differently, has like different things going on, and the audiobook again is done differently. Like each is a slightly different universe basically.
That is very, very cool, but I don't think that's anywhere near the norm.
No, it's not. But it came to mind when you said, well, are those the same experiences? And my brain just went, well, if it's Hitchhiker's Guide, no. Period.
So long, and thanks for all the different kind of fish, I guess.
Yeah. But I distracted again.
I'm not sure if I had anything else to say on that.
I mean, we talked about it before, but the value and subjectivity and stuff was also, I called it for silly reasons. I mean, I made fun of it before, and that's on me, but I made my statement about Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey when we were talking about fanfiction, and there's the, you read romance kind of thing, because romance isn't the same as whichever other genre, right? And I don't like that. I made my little joke before, but I don't like if you devalue it just because you say, oh, you read romance, that's a shitty genre, It doesn't have to be. There can be good romance, and if you like romance, or even if you like shitty romance, that's fine, as long as you're having fun, because what I feel like gets lost is reading is done for enjoyment, as you've said, and it's not fun if other people then ruin the little fun you could have had. Like, look down on you just because you don't read whatever they want you to read.
Mm-hmm.
However, what I do feel like can be an issue is if you don't even try to read something else. Because sometimes I feel like just because you're familiar with romance or certain tropes or familiar with a certain type of thing, it's kind of limiting.
Well, only if you know that you're missing out. If you don't know that you're limiting yourself, or if you don't experience it as a limitation, if you're happy just staying in your romance niche, I don't think a romance reader would necessarily see that as limiting. So where does this notion come from for you?
I have naturally my own experience. Everything's based on your own experience. For movies, for example, and books as well, I enjoy a certain type of it quite a bit, which makes sense. I do have my favorites. But I also came to appreciate the fact that I had to read outside of that niche. Because the thing is, if I have to learn about different types, different genres, it's interesting to then read into these things you might not be as familiar with, but you had to learn about them, and then recognizing them for what they do. Because one of my favorite types of reviews is when someone is able to say, this is not my thing. However, I do recognize these elements that elevate it or like that make it good. And I do think that people that enjoy this thing will have an amazing time. Don't devalue it because you don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Take it as it is. And I also feel like the enjoyment can actually grow in that regard. There were genres I really didn't like, and then going to approach it from a perspective where it's like, no, but just take it as its face value. Oh, this is a comic, take it as that thing, and look at it through that lens. It can get very interesting and fun, because even if it's not your thing, you still see and recognize elements that can be good, that you get to appreciate. And I feel like a lot of this value talk that goes in both ways. You have people that stay in their niche and say, how dare those highbrow people, pretentious pricks, argue for all these books and classics and artsy movies. Let me just enjoy the thing, because we're just people, we like to enjoy good things, right? Then you have the other side, the highbrow goes how can you enjoy this slop? Just read pretentious XY. That's just boring. Let people say, hey, I like the artsy shit, but I also like the slop, because sometimes I feel like having that thing because it does what I want. I have my expectations.
Absolutely.
And now I'm being mean because I called it slop, but For me, for example, that would be a horror camp movie, like a slasher campy movie that isn't done perfectly. It has its flaws, but I'm having a great time with it because it does what it's supposed to do. It entertains in a way it should, and it does what I like that it does, you know? And I appreciate it from that perspective. Is it a B movie? Probably, maybe even a C movie, but I'm having a great time. It's this kind of enjoyment that people can get from imperfect things, you know? I feel like this is kind of, it falls under the devaluation of things. Mm-hmm. I know this isn't about a book, this was now about movies, but it's just easier to say, well, people don't watch B movies. No, they do. It can be fun. And I feel like for horror, for example, gets shit on a lot. Even in conversations when I'm like, I like reading horror novels or even horror academia, you know, like history of horror. I had people tell me, why are you wasting your time on this shit? Horror movies aren't interesting, there's nothing there. Why are you reading a story like this? There's nothing fun in there.
That's just like your opinion, man.
I mean, yeah, just because you don't like it doesn't have to mean I don't like it. And I kind of realized that just because I don't like certain genres doesn't make the genre bad. And I actually came to realize it while watching movies and reading books in a genre that is out of my niche. And while not 100% mine, I saw what could be fun about it. Like giving it a chance might be nice, like a bit of a diversification because it gets you to appreciate things. And it's taking a chance. You might not like it, and I understand. But I feel like there I really enjoyed having like class force reading on you, because even if you didn't enjoy it, you gave it a go.
Yeah.
And the good thing is, if you're not in class, you can start reading something, and if you don't like it, you stop it, and if you enjoy it, you can finish it. It's great.
Okay, this is the hidden nugget of wisdom we're just going to put out there into the world for all our dear listeners. You can take this advice and you can keep it, and you can use the advice as many times as you'd like. It does not expire. You don't need to buy an NFT of ours or anything like that. We give you perpetual license to this advice. If you do not enjoy anything you bought, be it a movie, be it a book, be it a video game, it's okay to stop. Just drop it. It's fine. Just move on. But we're still glad you gave it a shot.
Yeah. Having an open mind for these things is great.
Yeah.
But don't force yourself. Like, this is not the point. If you realize this is not for you, if you realize I tried, but no thanks. Hey, thank you for trying, but really don't force it. Like, please don't. Don't want you to have a bad time.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, this was about the devaluation and subjectivity and stuff. It's just, I think that's kind of what with the whole college, university stuff kind of forced me in, where it's like, no, I actually do like that I had to diversify my reading, and I am now more open towards different topics that I hadn't considered before. Also because I like reading, and I like reading more about things that I hadn't read before. You
made some really, really good points. I really enjoyed that.
I do dislike the judgmental element of it, like from both sides. Mm-hmm. You know, the highbrow people that think, oh, because highbrow, and the lowbrow people that think because they're lowbrow. And I mean, even saying it like that is so mean. It's like, oh, why do we say that? It's basically the people that say, oh, you need to read classic books, old, I say Gothic novels. Oh my God, you haven't read Frankenstein?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole, oh, you haven't read XYZ is like, yeah, no, I haven't, because there are like 5 bajillion books out there. Thank you very much. I've never enjoyed that sort of gatekeeping where it's like, oh, you haven't read that, or you haven't read this, then you're not either not a reader, or you're not actually into it, or you're not actually into the genre, or blah blah. Like, no, stop it. Just don't. Never been a fan of that, no matter which side it came from. And I really dislike the notion that genre fiction is somehow inferior to what we'd call literary fiction. It isn't. It's just different. And the whole superiority debate is just, it's pointless. No, I have no energy for it.
The other argument is also pointless, where it's like just, oh, they're so pretentious, ugh, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Also gets on my nerves. Like,
yeah.
Guys, we just want people to have fun reading, and we don't want to gatekeep. I can tell you a really stupid story about gatekeeping in a way that ruined a game for me.
Sure.
I've never played a Pokemon game until I think I was 17, which in my generation makes no sense. Everyone played Pokemon. I've never had the game. And that meant I played, I think, XY. Is that 5th generation? I'm not 100% sure, but it's late.
That's 6th, I think. I think that's 6th gen.
I would say I had a pretty decent time. I had, like, a friend recommended it to me, so I played it. And then I met with another friend group of mine. And because I knew they all also played Pokemon, I was kind of happy to say, hey, I finally gave the game a go, right? Like, I gave the series a shot. I never did so before. And now I finally had the chance. And the first thing that they told me was, well, you didn't start with the first game, so you have no fucking clue anyway. You played the bad generation.
Get out! Gen 6 was good. I loved Gen 6. Fight me.
Honestly, I never managed to finish a Pokemon game other than that one. It's like, I had a good time with that game, but now why should I try, you know? I haven't played the original. Now, I mean, that's me being a bit of an exaggerating piece of shit, but it really killed the fun of having given it a go, because, like, how could I have known? So, oh, you like reading the genre? Oh, have you read XY? No? Oh, you pleb. I was like, yeah, now I'm not having fun. Why do we have to judge? Why would I try?
So bullshit. It's like if you started reading fantasy with a contemporary author and then people went like, well, but you haven't read Lord of the Rings, therefore we don't count you as a fantasy reader. You have to read Lord of the Rings first, and then you have to read this and that and this after that, and only then will we accept you into the echelons of the fantasy reader. It's bullshit.
To be an avid reader, you need to read whatever people tell you to.
Yes, exactly.
I honestly do understand the idea of recommendation, you know? Because I like my classic literature. And when people ask me, hey, what kind of pieces would you recommend to me? I'd be up there and tell you what I liked about some of the classics. And then I would probably ask, well, I'm not really that familiar with more contemporary stuff, with the exception of XY. Could you please tell me, what is there? Funny that I said XY, because that's the Pokemon game.
Yeah, it's the Pokemon games, yeah.
I don't mind the recommendation bit. It's the gatekeeping, or this idea of already judging.
Yeah.
Like, you don't even give people a chance to learn. And I think that is what ruins the fun of, I say, community, because it's like, why should I try this? It's like going to a local book club and they're like, oh wait, you haven't read the book that we read in last month?
Yeah.
How would I? I wasn't there before.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, before you join the book club, you have to read every single book that we've read previously, and only then are you allowed to join. It's like, no, that's not how this works.
And you need to have the same opinion, or else, right?
Ooh, bubbles, yay. Yeah.
Those are issues that I dislike. So when I say, like, try diversification or, like, have fun, I do mean that. Like, if you don't like other genres, don't do it. Like, don't force yourself to. To be fair, books are expensive, so maybe for a library or something. That's what I really liked with the libraries, where you can just pick whichever, and if you didn't like it, you didn't read it and brought it back, you know?
Yep.
The having to buy books is a bit more complicated, I would say. Or like having to buy games, having to buy into these things. But, you know, maybe you see something at a friend's house and before you didn't give it a go, and now you're like, hey, may I borrow the book?
Yeah.
It looks interesting. And if it wasn't, then it wasn't. I mean, it's not a big solution. It really is just that's how I like reading. I don't like to judge. And if people suggest something, I try to be more open-minded, usually now. I wasn't always. I was fucking stubborn as a kid.
That was a great little outline of why you think diversification is important. I think the core points you made were excellent. Thank you for that.
Somehow I talked about Pokemon though.
No, it's fine. Like, it's fine because, like, in the grand scheme of things, this is about consuming media and, like, fandom, and how do you, like, when are you part of X, part of Y, not the games.
Oh god, that's our bit now.
Yeah, it is. No, I did enjoy X and Y quite a lot, actually. One of my favorite Pokemon generations of all time, definitely.
But I think now I talked a lot about, you know, how I try to separate or not try to separate stuff, and you didn't really get to talk about your own as much, I think. I
don't really have too much to add, I feel like, because you put the argument so well for, like, why diversifying is important and why the arbitrary lines are bullshit. I will say I struggle with two things, one of which I already talked about is fan fiction, and the other is visual novels, because visual novels just confuse me. They exist on a spectrum, like I treat them as their own thing at this point, because they exist on a spectrum where some of them are just basically choose your own adventure books in digital form, and others have a lot more like gamey elements, so I'm like, my brain doesn't know what it's dealing with, like, am I reading a novel in digital form? Am I playing a game? I don't know where to put it. And it really varies depending on what the exact visual novel is. But generally, anything I read because I want entertainment out of it, I count in the sense of reading for pleasure. That's not the case if I read the news. Even if I do it because I want to, not out of any sense of obligation, but even if I want to read the news, I do so because I want to inform myself about what's going on. That's not the same motivation that gets me to pick up a book and read for fun. And same for academic journals or, non-fiction even, because there it's about learning about a subject, which to me is different. When I speak of reading for pleasure, I mean fiction. Specifically.
Interesting.
Not because I don't enjoy the other kinds of reading, but there I have a different intent. With fiction, it's just about the entertainment and just about, well, if I'm doing like a low spec sort of read through, it's just about the entertainment. I just want to get immersed, do a bit of escapism for a bit. If I'm more engaged with it and I want to think about it, I can do closer readings and stuff like that, right? But then I already have a different intent. Then I have the intent to analyze, which can be fun, of course, but it's already slightly different. And with news and everything like that, there it's completely different. There it's really about, I want to be informed or I want to learn about this thing, which to me is not the same as recreational reading. I do not read non-fiction recreationally at all. Like, I read non-fiction when I want to learn about a subject and that's it. That's just how I sort of categorize that.
Interesting. Because for me, reading non-fiction was something I didn't really do much in my youth, I have to admit.
I still don't.
But I do read a lot of, I say academia as a hobby now.
Yeah.
Like, for me, this is the same because the thing is, what I studied was heavily focused, for example, on, like, again, horror fiction. I like to read about horror history, horror genre, and I don't really think about, and I will use this at some point later. I like learning about it. I like reading about it. It's like if you enjoy watching documentaries, in my opinion. Like, you still like watching TV. You just watch that kind of TV, right? So, to me, having to say, what did I read for fun recently? I read a whole book about, I say, found footage horror because I was interested in it and I thought I'd give it a go. That would be one thing where I would say, I mean, to me, that still counts as reading for fun.
That's interesting.
Reading something is usually, I was interested in the plot line, I was interested in the narrative, I was interested in blah blah. So interested in the topic of found footage horror, to me, still is that. Which is also what I meant when I mentioned that I enjoyed a lot of academic reading I had to do during university. Because for me, that was still fun. Like, for me, this was still, I read this for fun, or I read the whole book instead of just 2 chapters because I thought the book was interesting. I read more because fascinating topic. I'm really interested in queer horror theory. I scour the internet for good books about these topics, and I read them for fun. Or I would say I read them for fun. It's kind of like, again, watching video essays and stuff, if we go back to YouTube.
Isn't queer horror just the straightest romance fiction you could possibly imagine?
I mean, yes, but that's not how it works.
I know.
But I do understand your argument very well, but because you said entertainment reading is fun, for me, learning is entertainment. If I'm interested in the topic. It is different if I have to learn something that I don't care as much about. If I do it like outside of whatever for fun, I would still count it as reading. That's what I meant in the earlier thing where I'm like, I felt weird because I read a lot of academic papers, but I mean, there was no way to count those on sites such as Goodreads. However, collections and essays that are put into books, you can absolutely say, I've read this book.
I think it's really weird. I think I'm just wired that way. Like, even with like you mentioned the college assignments again, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's very much as soon as you assign it to me, I want to do it less. Because someone other than myself has said, this needs to be done. That immediately lessens my motivation to read it, even if it is a subject matter that interests me. I do not like being told what to do, generally speaking, and that extends this much into things where it really shouldn't be happening.
I have to say, I saw them often as suggestions as well, like if it's a book or something.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many times where they offered me a chapter and I was like, this was stupid, and then I had my notes, and sometimes I thought that was so good, and then I just looked up the book and got the book for myself to read more.
That happens to me too, but like I have to genuinely engage with it and then be like, oh yeah, I want to follow up on that.
And I mean, same with the literature. I remember having to read a lot of books that I didn't want to read, and then being glad I've read them, but there were also moments where I was like, the reason I picked it was because the teacher basically said, don't pick this. And I was like, you know what? I will.
You read it out of spite. Nice.
Book's called The Beauty and the Sorrow. It's really good. I've never read it again since then because it was rough to read through. It had the longest footnote that I've ever read until I've read House of Leaves, which says a lot. But yeah, I'm like, I had fun in the end, but... And I like academia.
Yeah, I do too, but for me it's distinctly in the work category. It's work I enjoy, but it is work.
But isn't that in a way also devaluing it again? Because what if you don't use it for work? What did you read it for then?
That's the thing, that's why I don't read it outside of what I consider work.
Yeah, I do.
Like, I have this very, very clear distinction between basically reading for an experience, that's what I do for fun, versus reading for knowledge, which is never for fun. The activity of learning about stuff can be fun in itself, but I don't do it for fun, if that makes sense.
I mean, I guess that's the thing where it's like, yeah, I take my time with books. Like, what did you read for fun? Oh, that was this really fun book about cannibalism. In literature and film, it was so good. It had really good points and it made me think about stuff that I enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
That does sound like me quite a bit. I do enjoy that kind of stuff. And again, not even for specific projects. It's not like I think, oh, this is what I want to write about, and then I read a book. No, I'm like, oh, this book looks interesting. This topic might be fun. And then I just read for fun, and sometimes I enjoy it and sometimes I don't.
Funnily enough, if I figured I could do it freely and not lose time that I should be spending on other things, then I would probably enjoy it. But personally, I feel like I do not have the capacity to engage with any given topic that deeply if there's other things that need doing. And I think that's what kind of kills it for me.
I'm being so pedantic again, but how would you judge, autobiographies?
Well, how would I judge it? Well, the thing is, I don't care about people. No, what I mean is, I own, I think, 2 biographies, and I say I think I own 2 because I only definitely know I own 1, and I'm not entirely sure the second one is one, which goes to show I haven't read either of them. None of these I bought, they were gifts, and I don't know if I'll ever read them. And it's not because I don't care, but that would be an autobiography, that would be a niche I haven't explored yet. And it's like, I have trouble. Like, one of the biographies in my shelf is Steve Jobs' biography.
Okay.
It was gifted to me when it came out by a relative. And I obviously knew who the man was and why he was important and why it might be interesting to read about his life. But hey, this is the biography, the life and times of the person who made Apple what it is today. That's not enough of a hook for me. Just that, I'm like, yeah, that could be interesting, but it doesn't give me a pitch. It doesn't give me this is why you should read this. And therefore, unless I find intrinsic motivation to read about his life, I won't read it. And that motivation could be as simple as, you know what, today I feel like it, today I'm going to give it a shot. But so far that hasn't happened yet, and that book has been on my shelf for years at this point. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. Like, that would be a point where I really need to diversify my genres, where I could say, hey, look, I have got this autobiography or this biography. It would be interesting, but like, I usually just prioritize other stuff. And I'm sure if I read it, there would be things I enjoy about it and that I could think about and learn from. But it's just not something I gravitate towards naturally when it comes to reading for fun. Because to me, it's more in the camp of learning about person than enjoying story of person, if that makes sense.
Fair.
That's serious reading to me, if you will.
Again, what is serious reading, right?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, well, we're doing it again. It really is so easy to fall into this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where one of my main struggles was. Because again, what I sometimes enjoyed reading, be it academia or fan fiction, neither of this counts as reading sometimes.
Yeah, it's weird.
So I'm like, okay, I get it wrong either way, no matter what I do.
Yeah.
But one thing that you mentioned that I also want to bring up, like bookshelves, right? Books are so great. If only we had the time to read them.
I love books on shelves. I've got so many. Yeah, it's the same with the gaming backlog, like you mentioned in the article.
Honestly, this also goes back into the performance bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because being a reader sometimes just means being someone that has a lot of books, and people say, oh, you like to read, and you say yes.
Yes, there are a lot of books on my shelf. Let's not talk about how many I've actually read. But yeah, that's definitely another sort of...
One thing that I struggle with, and I mentioned it beforehand, is I compare myself quite often to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, I fell off reading. In my teens, back in the day, I used to read a lot, and it was usually thrillers or fantasy. Those were like my two genres that I really devoured. I read a lot of them. I read like one a day, and I thought that was a good time. And now I don't do that, because if I read academia, if I do one of those, I was really interested in that topic, it'll take a while, because it might be a collection of essays. And reading one essay will take a lot of time, and I mean, it's interesting and I'm really having a good time reading it and I'm doing it for fun, but I will not read 7 at once because it's a lot of information that you get through.
Yeah, you can't.
I really like reading academia during commutes, funnily enough, because they're like nicely sequenced. Meanwhile, if I read a book, I might lose the train station.
That's so interesting. It's the exact opposite for me.
I was reading a horror novel and I was so invested in the plot that I just missed my stop. But if I'm reading academia, I still have this idea of focus on where I am, you know? It's like I'm way less immersed because I'm learning.
That is so interesting. Because like, I'm also less immersed because I'm learning, but I'm more focused on what I'm reading because it's harder to understand than if I was reading fiction. And so I have to concentrate more on the act of reading and comprehending. Therefore, I would be more likely to miss the announcement that my station was coming up. That's how this would go for me.
For me, because I need to focus so much, like when I read a novel, a book, story, kind of narrative, I very much immerse myself so much into the words. I think the voices, I have all of this like near theater playing while I'm reading the words, and I'm so focused in this that I'm not paying attention to anything else. Meanwhile, when I'm reading academia or research, because I'm still thinking about the topic at hand and stuff, it's way more like loose, and I'm like still in the train basically, you know, I'm on a train. I'm noticing that. If I'm reading a novel, then I'm wherever the novel is taking place. I'm so out in wherever this is, like escapism gone.
Interesting.
I struggle.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's also one of the things where I'm like listening to audiobooks or podcasts, like fiction podcasts, while somewhere else got really complicated because I wasn't paying attention, or I was paying so much attention that I just lost track of where I am and didn't do anything. So I would be standing in a store, just not doing anything, not moving, holding maybe like coffee or something in my hand, listening to the story and just go, oh my God, this story is really good. And just not do anything else because I was focusing. Silly.
Yeah, you were talking about, the performing, basically, about the performance of reading.
I mean, this is where the issue came in also with Goodreads, because that's where you go with you read Pokemon amount of games.
No, that made no sense.
It made X amount
of sense.
X.
But why though?
This comparison that I kept in mind of, it didn't matter what I was reading anymore. It just mattered that I wasn't reading as much. I couldn't read a book a day anymore. Mm-hmm. Or if I read fan fiction, I didn't read a book a day. I just read 10,000 or 100k words of fan fiction, which would be a novel, but it isn't a novel. And I mean, why do we need to count, right? And the why we need to count has to do with our own perception of, what does it mean to say you like to read? And that was one bit that I wanted to mention or talked through in my article, where my main question kept being, but how much do I need to read that I am allowed to say I like to read? Or what do I need to read? Do I need to read academia? Is that fine? Should I say I like to read narratives, but only if they're actually published books? Because if they're fan fiction, then, I'm just not. And these kind of questions that mostly just are based on our own perception of things. And again, how much time do we spend? Do we have to? I mean, as long as you're having fun, why does it matter if you do it once a year or every month? And that was kind of a struggle for me. But how's that been going for you? I mean, you did say, again, falling off, getting back into it. Do you ever feel like you're not a reader, or do you feel like, no, I never had any issue?
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm definitely less of a reader than I was in my own sort of perception. And that is not to say I'm a worse reader necessarily, and more of my priorities have shifted. But let me start at the beginning, because when I was a teenager, I was one of the guys who read. That was my defining characteristic, because I was too ashamed to admit I was actually really into video games. Video games weren't cool yet.
I just didn't have friends.
Socially, this wasn't about friends, this was about people in class just coming up and hey, what do you like to do for fun? Well, I read. Riveting, I know. And so I took pride in how much I read and how well I could read. When I was younger, it was very apparent that I could read better than the other kids around my age. When that was a thing you trained in school, because you were still getting used to reading. I was the kid that could read out loud better, made fewer mistakes. I was the kid that read in its spare time. I was known for that. So that was kind of part of my personality, part of who I was. And I took pride in things like, oh yeah, I can read 100 pages per hour. That was my reading pace at one point. And I was kind of dismayed when that started dropping at some point, when I couldn't hit those 100 pages per hour anymore. And I was like, does that mean I'm worse at reading now? Am I less of a reader because I can't hit those 100 pages per hour anymore? And I realized, for instance, that I had started reading in the way that you described it as well, where I basically see the theatre, I hear the voices, right? When I read a novel, I basically read it out loud is the wrong way of saying it, because I do it to myself, but I'm basically internally reading the book to myself, which makes it impossible to hit those 100 pages an hour. But I realized, hey, that's now how I read, and I enjoy that performance to myself, if you will. I enjoy reading that way and imagining the voices and the way it's said and everything. But I did have a bit of an identity crisis there, especially because I started leaning more towards video games, like I said, and that wasn't mainstream at the time, and a lot of people saw it as childish or a waste of time or even dangerous. And it took me a while to realize that I still loved narratives, but that I just had diversified away from just experiencing narratives in books, and that I had started to look for these same kinds of narratives in video games, for instance. And I am less of a reader because I read less compared to earlier. and way less than when we were studying English literature. But I would say I still engage with about as many fictional narratives. It's just that it's happening through games more than it is happening through books at this point, or at least it was the case. And then it took me a while to really give books a shot again, and I did, and I realized, hey, yeah, I am enjoying this again. And it took a moment for that to happen. I had to give it a go, and for a while I even noticed, like, oh yeah, my attention span is kind of gone, because I was so used to, you know, having that quick dopamine hit of like a YouTube video or something, where I could just consume something and be done with it and move on to the next bit if I wanted, or not if I didn't want to, especially when it was like something that was really made to keep your attention from like the first bit and you didn't even have to do anything about it. Actively reading was harder, and until I reached that state of immersion in whatever narrative I was reading, I would be very easily distracted, and like I'd have a notification on my phone pop up and I'd like look at the damn phone and be out of the book again. What it took was really like a conscious effort of me grabbing a book off my shelf going, okay, I wanted to read this in forever, let's go read it. I'm gonna grab the book, I'm gonna go to a room, I'm not gonna take my phone with me, and I'm just going to read with no distractions. And that worked, and I realized, oh yeah, I actually do enjoy reading still. And it took a conscious effort of minimizing those distractions and actively choosing to read again to realize, oh yeah, I do still enjoy this way of experiencing a narrative, and I can still get immersed the same way I could back in the day. It just, I was kind of conditioned away from it for a while. So it was really, really weird. But it was definitely like a learning experience where it's like, oh yeah, I thought I didn't like to read as much anymore, but it was really just that other, quicker, easier dopamine hits were available, and my brain just was like, why bother reading when you can just fire up a funny cat video? It wasn't actually funny cat videos, but you get the gist, right? Like, why bother doing something that you have to actively engage in rather than just doing something that entertains you with basically no input from your own side? And I think in the whole journey, audiobooks actually helped me getting back into that, because audiobooks were like, I can experience a narrative, but I don't have to be super attentive to it. It was just easier to just have that on in the background while I did chores, while I was cooking, you know, that sort of thing. That was an easy way to experience a narrative, or while I was on the train. And it took that for a bit for me to then start reading again, and also getting an e-reader was the next step in that journey. I got an e-reader, and then we went to Mexico for like 3 weeks, and to have something to read, you know, while we were on the big flight and everything like that, I bought the first volume of the Expanse series, and those are hefty books. Those are like 600, 700, 800 pages a piece, and there's like 7 of them. Yeah, I figured I'd maybe read like at most 1 of them in those 3 weeks that we were in Mexico. Mm-hmm. I read 5 of them. That's when I knew, okay, this still works. It was like eye-opening to sort of see, oh yeah, this can still happen to me. I just need to make the effort to let it happen.
Funnily enough, I kind of have a similar experience, but it's also so different, because the 100 pages per hour and, you know, this kind of dropping and not doing anything, completely agree. But I dropped off by reading something, like you said, entertainment, you know, where you didn't have to put too much thought into it, right? Mm-hmm. For me, that was fan fiction, because fan fiction meant I knew the story, I knew the main characters, I didn't need to learn a whole new universe. Mm-hmm. I need something to relax, and I really like reading, but I'm not feeling academia, because I'm tired, and I'm not feeling like learning another book because it's a whole nother universe, you know? If I now start reading Game of Thrones, I would need to remember 15 more characters. And stuff like that, where I'm just like, I'm not ready for this. So instead I would just fall back onto fan fiction, or if I actually read as much fan fiction that I was interested in one topic, I would just find the next fandom that I like and read fan fiction there. Because I didn't need to worry about learning the whole new universe. I already knew everything. But like, that's what I did. I was always like, oh, but if I now get a book, I would need to do so much more additional work. So it was kind of the same thing. I was still reading, but I didn't count it as reading, because what was I reading, right? The same 50 takes on the same story beat based on the same thing that I thought was interesting about a story. Which, I mean, people write differently and they reinterpret things, and it was really interesting as a character analysis, I do have to admit. But I did feel this thing of, I'm not actually reading anymore. I don't even know how people write anymore. But the funny thing is, sometimes I read a book and I'm like, this person probably wrote fan fiction, because I recognize certain things. Things that I like, things that I don't like, goes both ways. But I realized contemporary fiction is so much different than what I usually read, because I have so many classics. And I'm always like, I need to read more contemporary fiction or else I'm being out of touch, and then I go back to fanfiction. So contemporary.
Arguably more contemporary.
It's really interesting because I had like similar issues, and to get back into reading, that's kind of why I started reading academia, because to me that was like, no, I need to get back into something, and I can't just reread Frankenstein or I can't just reread Hitchhiker's Guide again. I need to find something to kind of ease myself in. And I was like, you know what, I really like the academia, and then I can just do one essay on a topic that I'm interested in. And that was actually really helpful because I didn't need to remember new stories. They're usually analyses of things I usually knew already. You see the issue, right? And I'm like, okay, now I get to actually experience what other people think about it. It was still very much in this thing. And to then go, I need to go out there and find a book that I like is a lot harder now. It sounds interesting, but then they have like a blurb. You read a bit and then it's just not as good.
Blurbs fucking suck these days. They spoil everything. I hate them.
I'm pretty sure you saw that one. I read a book and it had the blurb that was like, oh, it's the new Agatha Christie. And I was actually intrigued in a mystery novel, and then it wasn't that. It wasn't the new Agatha Christie novel. It was just a drama. I don't mind reading out of my niche. I don't mind that. I said before, diversification, fun. But if you tell me this is a new Agatha Christie type of novel, I expect that. And if it's not that, I'm going to be disappointed.
Yep.
I was so angry at that book. And I do know that people like this book. And I know why people like this book. But I was freaking frustrated. My subjective review will not be nice because, yeah, I was hoping that this was going to happen. I had, again, expectations. They were not met. Therefore, I did not enjoy this as much.
Yeah.
Doesn't make the book bad. It was just like, why did they advertise it as such? Why would you do this to me?
Yeah, that's a weird one. I get that.
I was still so angry. I mean, it wasn't the only book that had this issue recently that I've read, sadly enough. It is quite common, I feel like. I mean, you want to have a good hook, but if you have the perfect hook, but the book doesn't deliver on that hook,
yeah,
people will be disappointed.
Definitely. You really have to sort of deliver on the promises you make, otherwise things are not gonna work out in that way, and it's a problem.
But now I'm also remembering another thing, because I said I didn't read much during university. Stephen King's It. This piece that's like 1,000 and something pages, because I saw the 2017 movie and I wanted to read the book before rewatching it. And I think I talked to you about that too, where I was like, I'm not sure if I can manage because we're supposed to watch it next week. I think whenever I had the time, I just read the book. The fact that I actually managed reading that, I was so proud of that.
That was impressive.
Considering I still had to do all the university reading. But it's like, it's still the thing. It's like, oh yeah, I haven't read in a while, but I read that book in a week.
Yeah, that's weird when it happens, but it's also kind of nice. Like, I enjoy the little, oh yeah, I can still do this. This is fine.
That is the thing. I don't do reading I read every... I mean, I do read every day. But I don't do it and I want to read every day kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I read when I feel like it and I read what I want to read because that's when I'm happy about reading, you know, that's when it's fun. For books and stuff, I realized I don't like pushing myself and I don't like having to follow a quota anymore. It frustrates me that I can't say I read a book a day, but it also doesn't freaking matter because I'm just having fun reading a book. And when I pick up a book and I enjoy the book, I probably will read it in a good amount of time, you know, like...
Yeah.
If I'm really interested and engaged with it, it's probably gonna be done quickly. I mean, even if it's a slow read, I'm just doing it whenever I feel like it and it's gonna be nice.
Mm-hmm.
But it's usually, I haven't read in like a month or so, but now I read 2 books because I really wanted to read those 2 books and I had a good time reading them. Instead of going, I need to read a book now and then because it's in my schedule.
Yeah, no, the scheduling thing actually kills it for me. I have to deliberately make the decision, I want to read right now, therefore I am going to. Which sounds so simple, but I had to really rewire my brain to remind it oh yeah, you do enjoy that, this is something we do for fun. Now it's an option again, mentally. That wasn't even on the table for quite a while, but now it's back on the menu and I couldn't be happier about it.
Since it's back on the menu,
Mm-hmm.
may I ask, what have you been reading?
Well, I have chiefly been reading Trudy Canavan, who's a fantasy author that was recommended to me way back in high school by a friend who was super into her books. Said friend recommended Trudy Canavan's Age of the Five to me back when I was maybe 16 years old. I read it this year, and I've had the books for a while. That was almost exactly half my lifetime ago that my friend recommended these books to me. And I finally got around to reading them. I had read other books by Canavan before, and I just binged that trilogy, that Age of the Five trilogy, and I started on her newest series, Millennium's Rule, and I'm really enjoying all of it. I feel like Canavan is a somewhat underappreciated fantasy author. She's written 4 major series at this point. The woman doesn't really do standalone, she always writes in series. And the books are always in stock at shops and they never go out of print apparently. But I don't really hear anyone talking about her books at all. And even if you search her up on YouTube and everything, there's not a lot of content about her work. And I think it's weird. I think they're pretty great. They're character driven and they feature complex societies. And they can be a little conservative when it comes to actual world building. You won't find any worlds that are super different from ours where the laws of physics are suddenly different. It's very much a high fantasy sort of vibe usually. You know, it doesn't really matter what the world itself looks like. It's much more about the characters and about the magic and the role that the magic plays in the plot, because she does that very well. The way the magic works and what it does is almost intrinsically bound to what conflicts actually happen. So the fact that it is fantasy matters. It's not just, oh yeah, I'm doing a character drama, but we're throwing in spells. The magic has its purpose in these worlds, and I really enjoy the way she does it. I finished 3 trilogies of hers, and I keep noticing that she's really into the idea of exploring different societies that are at odds with each other. It's usually just 2 societies at odds with each other over a certain thing, and it usually has to do with magic, and it usually has to do with religion in some way, or just different beliefs. They don't necessarily need to be religious beliefs, but it's very much this, we're kind of 2 sides of the same coin, kind of both sides sort of have a point.
Mm-hmm.
But because of how they are driven by ideology, be it philosophical differences or religious differences, they have trouble coexisting. And what do we do with that, right? A lot of the time, that's the basic conflict, the core conflict that she's exploring, and she does that through really detailed and nuanced characters where you can really sort of, okay, I can see the points of both sides to a certain extent, and then it escalates to a point where it's like, uh-oh, something's gotta give. And I think she does that really, really well. And I find it a shame that I basically hear nobody talk about these books because I really like them. So I would highly recommend Canavan's Age of the Five in particular to any fantasy fans that are intrigued by the question, what if gods were real and societies formed around worshipping those gods? Do not read the blurbs on these books. They do spoil things. If you're intrigued, just start with Priestess of the White, the first book in the series. You'll know very, very quickly whether you like that or not. You can even read the first chapter for free on Canavan's website. So really easy way to kind of get into it, see if you like it. I highly recommend the series. I won't say a word about what happens in the plot because I will spoil it. So yeah, that's been the main thing I've been reading recently.
Huh.
And it's been a fun ride. It's been a really fun ride.
Sounds like it.
On the slightly less, well, mini tangent, I think you know, Mischief, that in the past, I started writing a fantasy novel. Mm-hmm. Age of the Five almost has the exact same core idea.
Oh, you mentioned that. I remember.
It was so bizarre. Like, Canavan took it in a slightly different direction and focused on different things than I did focus back in the day. But like some of the core ideas, the overlap was so strong. I was like, in a way, I feel like I don't even need to write my own book anymore because whatever social commentary I could have made on the topic, Canavan nailed it. Like, no, I'm good. I don't need to do this. And at the same time, I could do things slightly differently and I could take these ideas in a different direction, but somebody has done it. And it's just how close some of these ideas were. I'm not saying I could execute it at the level that Canavan does. I couldn't. But like just the realization that, whoa, somebody else thought this topic was interesting and made a whole damn trilogy out of it. Nice. And the other slightly less traditional thing I've been reading recently was the first manga series I ever bought, The Apothecary Diaries. I'm only partway through. I watched the anime when it aired, quite liked it, except for some scenes that did some very stereotypically anime things that didn't sit well with me, because they bordered on character assassination. And I was curious, like, is this a thing they made up for the anime? Is this a thing that's in the manga? So I started buying the manga, and I am very, very happy to report that the questionable scenes of the anime that I really didn't like and that felt like character assassination were in fact character assassination added for fan service and are not in the manga. Go read the manga, it's fucking good. Thank you.
Nice.
What about you?
I read a lot, but also not, you know? I have a tendency to usually just grab whatever interests me at the moment, depending on whatever I've been doing before, so, you know, stuff like that. And as it happened, I was watching a horror playthrough of the Dark Pictures anthology House of Ashes, which included, well, military setup and parts of the invasion of Iraq. Mm-hmm. And instead of focusing on the actual horror story told, my brain goes, oh, that's a very interesting topic. I haven't really read about this before. And I was looking into historical fiction and, you know, other video essays covering this topic. And suddenly I find myself reading something completely different, namely Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, which is a collection of short stories based on his experiences during the Vietnam War. Mm. So not exactly the same, but it was kind of like tangential. And now I'm intrigued because back in the day I was very young. Vietnam War I wasn't there, and for the other stuff I was 8. So I didn't really know much. And because we're not in America, I knew even less, because that's not one of the wars that we talk about quite often. I've read a lot about World War I and World War II, both in school and out of school, but that is a topic that I came to the realization I knew very little of, and suddenly I was very interested in. Mm-hmm. And The Things They Carried was published in 1990, and it's the third book that is kind of a war story, historical fiction kind of thing of his. And I am very tempted to pick up his other 2 books as well. I'm not yet done with The Things They Carried, but it's very well written. It's also a rough read because, I mean, it's serious but jokey. It's very I can actually give you a quote.
Mm-hmm.
A true story is never moral. It does not instruct nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things they've always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie.
Damn, that's good.
And it's very honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very rough, and I've been very much enjoying it. It's not, going back to diversification, it's not something I usually read,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a very deliberate, like, historical fiction. It's not analysis or something like that. And it was out there, but I was interested in it. I gave it a go.
Mm-hmm.
And so far I've been enjoying it quite a bit, as much as you can enjoy war stories, you know.
Yeah.
I haven't finished reading it yet, but I already do recommend, if that's a thing you enjoy. And I guess The Beauty and the Sorrow, if you're actually interested in World War I historical fiction. That's the one other one.
That would be very interesting.
Back then I read it out of spite, even though it wasn't my thing, and now I'm here doing the same thing again, but just because I came across and thought, oh yeah, that's something I didn't really think about before. Let me look into it.
That's cool.
But yeah, I think that's about it for me. Or I'm reading Slay the Princess.
Right.
Since the Pristine cut came out.
It does sound like it's rather pristine from what you've told me so far.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've made our recommendations, we'd be curious to know, have you struggled with the things that we've outlined in this podcast? And what have you been reading recently that you'd recommend to us and your fellow listeners? If you haven't already done so, do check out Mischief's original article on the Goodreads challenge bit. And thank you very much for listening to this episode of Poor Overthink. Until next time, I've been Sherigan.
And I'm Mischief.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Ate merci.